Hello guys, so in today's video, I'll be showing you how you can further improve your lunar photography so that you'll be able to capture more detail with the lunar surface than what you could do before. So I've already shown you in a previous video of mine as to how you can capture the moon in great detail using a smartphone, a DSLR, or a mirrorless camera using either a zoom lens or a telescope. But in this video, I will show you how you can go from this kind of lunar image to this kind of lunar image with much greater detail. And if you haven't watched my previous video yet, then I recommend that you watch it so that you will know what to do, especially if you're still a beginner in lunar photography. So first things first, you need to have all of the camera equipment and all of the things that you need to properly photograph the moon. Say a telescope, and then use a smartphone or a DSLR or a mirrorless camera to photograph the moon. But you can also use zoom lenses or very high focal length camera lenses in order to photograph the moon, and something to stabilize your camera on, like a tripod, but if you don't have one, you can just improvise. And also use an uncompressed file format, like raw file format, and also in terms of video. So don't use MP4, because that is not an uncompressed file format. And I will show you how you can create such an image from start to finish. So I'm gonna show you how you can process it in softwares like PIPP and how to stack it using Autostakkert3, as well as how you can edit it in editing softwares like Photoshop in order to get the most amount of detail from the moon itself. But based on my experience, if you don't have a dedicated astronomy camera, especially for lunar photography, and you only have a DSLR or a mirrorless camera with you, then instead of taking recordings of the moon that lasts for around a minute or two or more, instead of doing that, I recommend that you take a series of raw images of the moon instead of taking recordings of it. So in this case, you have to take many images, like hundreds of them. And if you don't have a star tracker, you have to make sure that the moon is properly aligned in each individual image, as in the orientation of the moon itself is the same, and it is not tilted, just a little bit to its side. But if the moon jumps from one part of the image to the other, but the orientation of the moon is the same and it's not tilted a little bit to its side, then that is fine. So you have to make sure that the moon itself is properly aligned in every single individual frame. Otherwise, the output image, after stacking it in Autostakkert, will be a mess. And I usually do this after I have put them all through PIPP, because it makes it easier for me to know whether or not the moon is properly aligned in each individual image after PIPP exports them in TIFF file format, after it centers the moon in every image. But if you're using a star tracker, then you won't have a problem with this whatsoever. So most of the time I take around 100 to 200 images, depending on the scene conditions, but you don't have to take hundreds of images though. You can just take around 60 or 70 of them if the scene conditions are good. But if the scene conditions are bad, then that's when you have to take more images, like around 80 to 90 images or more. But I usually take hundreds of images to make sure that the noise is as low as possible. But you don't have to do that. And yes, you will still have to use an uncompressed file format for this. And since it's in terms of images, then it has to be in raw file format. And to make sure that I capture as many images as possible in a shorter span of time, I tend to use my camera's built-in self-timer mode that has this continuous feature where my camera, after 10 seconds, will start shooting a particular number of images after releasing the shutter. So say for example, if I want my camera to shoot 10 images after 10 seconds using the camera settings that I've already set, then the camera will start shooting the given number of images that I want it to take using the camera settings that I set up. And after I'm done doing it 3 or 4 times, I make sure that the moon is still in the frame, and when it's about to go out of frame, I tend to realign the moon again so that it doesn't go out of frame, and then start taking pictures again. But if you don't have a star tracker, you won't have a problem with this whatsoever. But since I don't have a star tracker, this is what I do. And you also have to make sure that there are no clouds in the way. Otherwise, that will end up in your stacked image and messing the whole thing up. But just a bit of haze will still do, as long as the movement of the clouds is not visible in front of the moon. But if you have a dedicated astronomy camera like a ZWO-ASI, then you can just take recordings of the moon using an uncompressed file format. and you won't really get a lot of detail from the moon using that way. But in terms of using a smartphone, you might still be able to do it using RAW file format instead of JPEG. And don't use the MP4 file format because that is not an uncompressed file format. But if you're using a smartphone, you might want to use an external Bluetooth device so that you will be able to constantly capture the moon without producing camera shake, so that the moon will be as stable as possible in your image. And then afterward, you will first have to put them in a software called PIPP, and then after doing that, you'll have to put them all in another software named Autostakkert3 to stack all of the images together before you edit them in Photoshop or whatever editing software that you use. So this video is mainly for how you can process lunar images instead of lunar recordings, but there are already tutorials online that shows you how you can process video files of the moon after capturing it using PIPP and Autostakkert3 as well. So as for this exercise, I am using my DSLR camera to photograph the moon, but you can also do the same thing with your smartphone, as long as those image files are in RAW file format. So now let's dive into processing your uncompressed lunar images. So the first thing that we are gonna have to do here is to open up PIPP. And what this does is that it stacks planetary and lunar images and centers them in the frame. The second thing that you have to do is to import your RAW files into PIPP by clicking the Add Image Files button here, or by dragging them and dropping them into the program. Since we are dealing with the moon here, we're gonna enable Solar Lunar Full Disk. As for the input options, we're not going to change anything here. So now we have to proceed to the processing options. You have to untick the Convert to Monochrome since the moon has plenty of really nice colors due to its minerals. So it's better to work with a full color image. The second thing is to tick or untick the Enable Cropping option. So I've got mine unticked since I can just do the cropping during post. But you can tick it if you want to and change the pixels to whatever values you want. Now to the Quality Options tab, we're gonna tick Only Keep the Best Quality Frames option and choose either number of frames to keep or percentage of frames to keep. But either one will do. So what this does is that it gives each image a score and dump all those images into a subfolder. Each image will have a percentage in their file name and are ranked from best to worst. Anything over 85% can work just fine, so the higher the better. So since I have 240 images in total, I can choose to select the best 220 frames, but still, yet again, either percentage of frames or number of frames will do. So now, going to the output options, we're going to be outputting this as TIFF files and make sure that the create subdirectory is ticked, and give this whatever name you want. So the next thing we're going to do is to go to the Do Processing tab and start processing. Although, take note, depending on how fast your computer is, this can take quite a while, especially when you took many hundreds of images. So make sure to close everything else before you start processing if you have a slow computer. So now PIPP has finished processing all of our images, and here is the subfolder for PIPP. So as you can see, it has ranked them in terms of quality. The next thing that I'm gonna have to do is to look through each individual image to see if the moon is in the right orientation all the way. Since if there is one image where the moon has a different orientation from the other images, it can mess up the final stacked image, especially if there is considerable deviation from the rest of the images. If you have a star tracker though, this is not a problem for you. However, since I do not have a star tracker, I will have to go through each individual image and check if the moon is in the right orientation all the way. This is gonna take quite some time and is usually the lengthiest for me, so I'm gonna have to skip this part. So from 220 images exported by PIPP, it went down to just 100 images, so it's a big loss. However, 100 images will still do. So the next thing that you have to do is to import all of the TIFF files into another program called Autostakkert3. So there are two ways to do that, and one is by dragging and dropping all of the images, or click on the open button here. So what Autostakkert does is that it stacks all of your images, which allows you to get more detail from it. The first thing we're gonna have to do is to go to this window here and click the Place a P-Grid button. What this does is that it creates a bunch of reference points on the moon in the form of squares, which it uses to stack each image and align them. However, you might not want to have thousands of these squares all over the moon, because the more reference points there are, the more CPU intensive it becomes. But if you don't have enough of these squares, then you will end up having a lower quality stack. So you will have to find the middle ground here. So you can change the number of reference points by clicking the up and down arrows here, but for me, around 1166 reference points is fine. But you can change it to whatever value you want. From here, we're now gonna have to go back to our original window and go to the frame percentage to stack. Since I only have 100 images and I'm fairly happy with what I have, I'm gonna have to stack all of the images. Since we already filtered out all of the best quality images in PIPP, you might just want to stack all of the output files from PIPP in Autostakkert3. But if you want to ensure that you have all of the best quality images, you might just want to change the percentage down to whatever value you want. You might also want to tick the sharpened option here if you're not that experienced yet with sharpening. However, based on my experience though, I can get better results of the moon when I enable the sharpened option. So in the free field pod, you can use this to name your file whatever you want. After you're done with all of that, you can then hit stack. So though, depending on how fast your computer is, this can take quite some time. And make sure that you close everything else before stacking if you have a slow computer, otherwise the program might become unresponsive for you. So I'm gonna have to skip this part. So Autostakkert3 has now finished stacking all of the images. Once it does, Autostakkert will output 1 or 2 stacked images and puts them into a new folder within your PIPP subfolder. Since I enabled the sharpened option, I got 2 files here. The first one is unsharpened and the other one with the conv is sharpened. So the next thing that I'm gonna have to do is to import the sharpened image into Adobe Photoshop. But if you don't have Photoshop, you can use other programs like GIMP, Snapseed, or the Adobe Lightroom app for mobile phones. So from this point on, you might want to watch my other video as to how you can edit the moon to get plenty of detail from it. But if that doesn't work for you, then here's what I tend to do. Also, don't forget to crop your moon image first before you proceed with anything else. First, duplicate the original layer using Ctrl-J and convert the new layer into a smart object. Next, go to Filter and click the Camera Raw filter. From here, I tend to brighten the moon a little bit. As well as applying a lot of texture adjustment here, and a bit of clarity as well, and dehaze. And just a little bit of contrast. And just a little bit of sharpening. Not too much, otherwise it would be too grainy for me. A little bit of noise reduction and color noise reduction as well. Zoom in. Okay, let's not apply a lot of sharpening here because it'll be a bit too much. Turn the texture adjustment to the max. And hit OK. So you can pretty much see the before and after here, just from that simple Camera Raw filter. Also, the next thing that we will have to do is to bring out the colors of the moon. So I'm gonna have to use the same method for bringing out the colors of the moon in a previous video of mine, which involves applying the auto tone, auto color, and auto contrast, and duplicating this layer twice, and applying luminosity and blending mode on the upper layer, and soft light for the middle layer. Also, if it's a bit too bright, then I'm gonna have to add a brightness and contrast adjustment here, and lower the brightness of the moon, like that, and add a vibrance and saturation layer, adjustment layer, and turn up the brightness. As you can see, we have brought out the colors of the moon, the browns and the blue hues, as a result of the lunar minerals on the surface of the moon. I'm gonna have to add a little bit more vibrance here. Something like that will do. And to remove the color fringing on the edges, I'm gonna have to apply a soft black brush on the edges of the moon. Sort of a layer mask kind of thing. And apply it on the edges. Notice how the color fringing disappears. So yeah, something like that. Also, don't forget to merge these layers into one layer. Pretty much you can apply if you're finishing touches after this. So I'm just gonna apply a curves adjustment here. As well as a brightness and contrast adjustment. Something like that will do. So I'm gonna have to convert this thing into another smart object again and do another camera raw filter adjustment for the finishing touches. And adjust the texture adjustments here. Somewhere there will do, not too much of it. So I'm just gonna have to rasterize this layer. So you can pretty much see the before and after here. So yeah, that's pretty much it guys. That's how you can make your moon images pop a little bit more. And with that, if you like this video and find it very useful, please do like it, subscribe to me, and share it to whoever might find it useful. And if you're planning to enjoy the night sky anytime soon, I wish you good luck, clear skies, and hopefully you'll be able to get better lunar images than you could ever do before. And hopefully you'll also be able to photograph the total lunar eclipse on May the 26th this year. So baboosh.